My name is Catherine Hull, and I work as a riparian specialist out of the Calgary region for the Alberta Riparian Habitat Management Society. We're more commonly known as cows and fish. I'm not really sure why that is. The other name hasn't quite caught on yet. For those of you who are not familiar with our organization, we are a non-profit charitable organization that works with landowners and community groups across the province to help promote riparian and watershed stewardship in Alberta. One of the projects that we're currently working on is a partnership project in collaboration with the Alberta Conservation Association, Alberta Environment and Sustainable Resource Development, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and also Trout Unlimited Canada. The primary goal of the project is to assess riparian health within priority remaining habitat for Westlope cutthroat trout and Alberta's southeastern slopes, specifically in the Bow and the Oldman drainages. In 2011 and 2012, we conducted 32 riparian health inventories, primarily on public lands, in consultation with public land managers and grazing leaseholders, in addition to a few inventories on private land holdings in collaboration with private landowners. Now, in addition to trying to gain a better understanding of riparian habitat issues and concerns in priority Westlope cutthroat trout reaches, another key goal of the project is to help try to generate awareness about the habitat requirements of this threatened fish species, and to help guide and encourage Westlope cutthroat trout land stewardship and recovery efforts. Now, we've attempted to do this through not only through one-on-one discussions with land managers as part of our riparian health inventory process. We've also tried to do this through multiple stakeholder workshops, field days, and presentations like this one. So native fish, like the Westlope cutthroat trout and the bull trout in Alberta, are essentially the gold seal of water quality and are a metric of the health of our watersheds. Essentially, as I will explain in this presentation, these species are like the proverbial canaries in the coal mine, except that they are indicators of environmental integrity at a watershed scale. Not only are they sensitive to water diversions and dams that block their migratory paths and isolate populations, they are also sensitive to changes in water quality. So it follows that as the watershed goes, so do the fish. Now, before I continue, I do need to acknowledge the contributions of my fish biologist colleagues with Alberta Environment and Sustainable Resource Development, in particular Matthew Coombs and Jenny Earle, who unfortunately could not be here today. I also need to acknowledge my colleague Lauren Fitch, our provincial riparian specialist with our organization, who is also a retired senior fisheries biologist with the province. Lauren was instrumental in helping to craft this presentation and in helping to assemble some of the archival imagery that I'll be showing you today. Lauren is currently away in BC, otherwise he would have been here himself to deliver this presentation. Hopefully, I'll do my best trying to field some of the questions in Lauren's absence. Now, just a bit of a disclaimer, as of course this is a forestry focused workshop, you'll notice that this presentation does have a bit of a forestry focus to it as well. Now, typically we do have a broader focus for our presentations, as of course multiple sectors and land user groups all have a role to play when it comes to Westlope cutthroat trout recovery. So let us begin a journey back in time to tell the tale of two fish, a story whose ending is really in your hands. Our story begins over 10,000 years ago next Tuesday, when ice covered where we now sit, including the mountains west of us. After this period of glaciation, fish found their way from glacial refuges into the rivers now draining from the mountains. Bull trout, Rocky Mountain whitefish, and Westlope cutthroat trout found homes and persisted in a dynamic, arguably tough environment. They rolled the storms, the floods, fires, droughts, occasional landslides into their genetic makeup. All of these challenges to trout survival occurred within a natural range of variation. For thousands of years, these species not only survived in, 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 they thrived here in great abundance. done to the land is often short and incomplete. Yet without such knowledge, we really can't grasp how much the landscape has changed and how much it is likely to continue to change if the present trends persist. Northwest Mounted Police officers stationed at Pincha Creek in Calgary made rudimentary assessments of fish populations in southwestern Alberta and reported on their findings in 1890. One wrote, "When I fished first about 14 years ago, the rivers and streams teemed with fish. Now it is much different." Again, that was written in 1890. So this is the beginning of a shifting benchmark for trout populations, signaling a progressive decline, but one that really doesn't register on our collective consciousness. Consider for a moment these three individuals back from a fishing trip on Willow Creek near Fort Macleod in 1902. Not only were fishermen a lot better dressed back then, but their catch sizes were also remarkably different to what we see today. What this photograph does is it gives us a window not only in terms of the abundance of westwood cutthroat trout at that time, but also their widespread distribution, stretching far into the plains. Angling techniques were certainly different back then. Equestrian-based angling really seems to have fallen out of use completely. Equipment was more primitive, cheaper, and bigger, but rod sizes were a function of fish size. This bull trout is from a small stream in Waterton Lakes National Park. This one was caught in the Castle River at the mouth of Mill Creek. Anglers certainly did like to dress formally for the important occasions of fishing. Now, fishing wasn't the only activity occurring on the landscape that would become Alberta at that time. Logging as a major land use was established by the late 1880s. Rivers were used to transport logs to sawmills, one being the Eau Claire Mill, now the upscale Eau Claire Market along the banks of the Bow River in Calgary. At that time, we also saw high levels of livestock grazing, such as sheep and cattle grazing in the Crow's Nest Pass, perpetuated in part by a concern over forest fires and the need to reduce forest loads. Dams for power production were built on the Bow River and several key tributaries, starting after the last century. Alberta's fame as an energy producer took hold with the development of the Turner Valley gas field in the 1920s. All of these land uses and more led to noticeable declines in fish populations, and concerns began to mount over the future of fish production. As native fish populations declined, the Alberta landscape continued to change. Motorized access was initially low because few roads and trails existed. Many trout populations were sustained because of this isolation. But as resource extraction increased, so did access. Access opportunities, coincident with more expendable income, more time, and more gasoline-powered devices, changed the landscape even more. Over time, the scale of our endeavors has increased in orders of magnitude from what it was 50 to 100 years ago. And ultimately, it has been the transformation of our southern Alberta watersheds, the cumulative effects of logging, mining, dams, diversion, grazing, transportation networks, and residential developments in the Bow and the Oldman River basins that contributed to the dramatic decline in native bull trout and westwood cutthroat trout populations, including extirpation of these species from large parts of their former range within the watersheds. Another important contributing factor to their decline has been competition and hybridization pressures from the introduction of non-native trout species from as early as 1910, including brook trout from eastern Canada, brown trout from Europe, golden trout from California, and rainbow trout from other parts of North America. Many of our streams and rivers in Alberta were historically seeded with these introduced species in response to declining native fish stocks. So when we look at the historic distribution for westwood cutthroat trout in Alberta, we see that their historic range once extended from the upper headwaters of the Bow and Oldman watersheds downstream to the plains below Calgary and also downstream to the plains near Lethbridge. Now the present-day distribution of native westwood cutthroat trout looks more like this. Quite a startling contrast. In fact, it may even be hard for you to see some of those green highlighted reaches of stream in comparison to the previous slide. Native stocks of Westlow cutthroat trout have since been reduced to less than 10% of their historic range, and are now mainly confined to a few isolated headwater reaches in Alberta's eastern slopes, primarily in the Oldman River Basin. As a consequence, they are presently listed as threatened under the Provincial Wildlife Act. And I just heard word from Jenny last week that they've also received listing as a threatened species under the Federal Species at Risk Act. Recovery plans for the species have been underway for a number of years now. But again, the news flash in the fisheries world is that the provincial recovery plan has now been approved by the minister and will be posted online shortly. Similarly, the federal recovery strategy will be posted online for comment in the next couple of weeks. So let's hope that this time we do pay attention to what happens to these last strongholds of Westlow cutthroat trout habitat. Similarly, for bull trout, you can see that there's been a major contraction in their historic range compared to what we see today. The current range is shown here by the cross-hatching. Bull trout were listed in 2002 under the Alberta Wildlife Act as a species of special concern. And again, another newsflash is that they've recently been listed as threatened under the Federal Species at Risk Act. It's estimated that there's been about a 33% reduction in their provincial range. But if we look specifically within the Old Man watershed, bull trout have seen a 70% decline in terms of their historic range. Alberta fisheries biologists recently classified 128 bull trout subpopulations that were believed to be genetically distinct stocks into 51 core areas. Short-term population trends indicate approximately 61% of core populations are in a state of decline. There are as many as 11 known extirpated subpopulations of bull trout and 3 extirpated core areas. 78% of the core areas currently ranked as high risk or at risk of extirpation. So, how can we ensure that the mighty bull trout, the grizzly bears of the aquatic world, and the delicate speckled Westlow cutthroat trout, so named for their distinctive red flash below their jaw, continue to be part of Alberta's natural and cultural heritage? To better understand how we can maintain these species into the future, we do need to reflect for a moment on their habitat requirements. Like grizzly bears, bull trout have extensive ranges, moving downstream to productive waters to allow them to attain large sizes. But they always return home to small tributaries to spawn. These are special places where water bubbles up through the gravels, signaling to bull trout that eggs laid here will survive and hatch. For Westlow cutthroat trout, these open, well-oxygenated pools provide essential overwintering habitat. These pools with upwellings of groundwater are often related to old-growth forests. Old-growth forests are good sponges. They capture, store, and slowly release water. Both Westlow cutthroat trout and bull trout require cold, clean, well-oxygenated water to survive. Their preferred temperature range is between 9 to 12 degrees Celsius. Both species require clean, unsilted cobbles and gravels for spawning. Females construct threads or nests in loose gravel substrate. Unlike bull trout, Westlow cutthroat trout spawn from May to July, whereas bull trout are fall spawners. Westlow cutthroat trout eggs typically incubate in the spawning gravels for about 6 to 7 weeks, making them particularly vulnerable to development during the spring and summer period. Riparian edge habitat along stream banks and in the floodplain plays an important role in terms of helping to maintain the cool, clean water conditions that trout require to survive. Overhanging riparian trees and shrubs not only provide shade from hot sun, shelter from predators, a source of woody debris to provide in-stream habitat, they also provide an important source of fish food, like mayflies and caddisflies. Healthy riparian areas help to protect water quality by reducing erosion and maintaining the stability of stream banks due to the effect of hundreds of kilometers of deep binding root mass from riparian trees and shrubs, sedges, and rushes. Plant roots by binding stream-bank soils and slowing erosion, help to create deep, narrow channels with stable but undercut banks that are ideal for raising trout. Riparian areas, like our old-growth forested landscapes, act like giant sponges, helping to trap and store moisture below the ground. This moisture can then be released back into the stream or channel later into the fall, which again is important for helping to maintain rearing habitat for juvenile westlobe cutthroat trout. Now, because clean gravel substrate is a critical component of the spawning, rearing, and feeding habitat for westlobe cutthroat trout and bull trout, these fish are both extremely sensitive to sedimentation of watercourses. As little as a 10% increase in fine sediment has been shown to negatively affect spawning and rearing success for these fish. In the short term, unnatural sediment loads can smother and suffocate trout eggs in spawning habitat, as well as compromising important food production areas and rearing refuges for young fish. In the long term, when too much sediment gets into streams, it can embed or cement the substrate, filling the interstitial spaces between the gravel where trout eggs incubate and macroinvertebrates live and feed. Sediment inputs can also lead to nutrient enrichment due to additional phosphorus, resulting in more algal growth and altered aquatic life. In severe cases, and during periods of low flow, this can lead to reduced dissolved oxygen levels and fish kills. Now, although it's true that riparian corridors do a tremendous job of helping to filter out and trap sediment from overland runoff, it's important to remember that they can only do so much, and that they do have a limited buffering capacity. Now, land use practices that dramatically increase sediment contributions are definitely of concern to westlobe cutthroat trout and bull trout. Now, erosion risks are of course greatest where we have disturbance to steeply sloping landscapes, where gravity constantly spurs on sediment runoff. Now, logging is of course a land use disturbance that undeniably creates erosion and produces sediment. The amount of sediment produced often tends to be far in excess of what happens naturally and what trout are adapted to for their survival. And of course, the bigger the footprint of logging, the more sediment that is produced. Concerns are of course amplified when there are no riparian buffers that are left in place along ephemeral tributaries or other streams or watercourses. Or where the scale of logging overwhelms the riparian buffers that are left in place. Logging, of course, also requires a transportation network, which equates again to more sediment. And sediment not only bleeds from new cut blocks, but also over a longer period from all of the trails and roads that are required as part of the forested footprint. And unfortunately, the problems created by this footprint tend to persist long after the last log leaves the logging roads. Now, not surprisingly, the best predictors for declines in bull trout populations are increased road densities and also increased logging footprint. Road densities of about 0.6 kilometers per square kilometer are considered limiting for bull trout. Road densities greater than this tend to diminish the sustainable integrity of the bull trout populations. Similarly, for westlobe cutthroat trout, research from several subbasins within the BC Kootenay drainage shows that 50% declines in westlobe cutthroat trout relative abundance can occur at road densities in the 0.04 to 0.085 kilometers per square kilometer. Now, in this case, the study looked at the effects of increasing road density on erodible soils within 100 meters of streams. Now, it is true that with time, our disturbance footprints can heal, but this can be a long process. And unfortunately, where access roads and trails are not reclaimed or managed, trails sometimes never do get a chance to revegetate. Motorized vehicle access management and access management planning is not always easy to do. It can often be imperfect, and it typically tends to be under-enforced and under-resourced. Even where motorized access plans are in place, restricting use to designated bridges and designated trails requires a lot more on-the-ground resources than we presently see within our forest land use zones. The reality, unfortunately, is that motorized access continues to generate new sources of sediment, even on trails that are part of designated access systems. Another problem is that mitigation measures that are put in place to reduce impacts from logging, roads, or industrial development are not always effective. An overburdened sediment fence or a plugged culvert, or for that matter, hanging culvert, can negate the best of intentions. Now, culverts, as you know, are long and narrow and tend to speed up water that flows through them. And if they are improperly sized, this tends to result in erosion downstream of the culvert, creating this type of hanging culvert situation, which if you're a fish looking to migrate upstream to your spawning or overwintering site, is generally not a good thing. Now, the only exception to this may be on pure westlope cutthroat trout streams, where hanging culverts can indeed be a good thing if they do help to keep rainbow trout out of streams that have not yet been invaded by rainbow trout. We know that our logging activities do not occur in isolation. Logging simply represents one of many land uses occurring simultaneously on our increasingly busy landscapes. This means that it is becoming increasingly important to manage the cumulative contributions of logging and the long-term effects of logging in terms of perpetuating linear disturbances on the landscape. In 1950, there were 177 stream crossings in the Upper Oldman watershed upstream of the Livingston mountain range. By 2001, this had increased to 2,803 crossings. Today, in the Oldman watershed, we see that 80% of the total area already has linear disturbance densities over 1.2 kilometer per kilometer square, well above desired thresholds that I discussed for native fish. Now, as a consequence, this suggests that we do need to be extra cautious about land use decisions in relatively undisturbed watersheds within the Oldman River Basin, such as Hidden Creek. Hidden Creek not only contains genetically pure populations of westlope cutthroat trout along its entire length, it's also the epicenter for more than half of all bull trout reproduction in the Upper Oldman River watershed. Now, last fall, a study was done by fisheries biologists to compare sediment loading in 3 drainages in the Upper Oldman: the Hidden, Dutch, and Racehorse Creeks, with known populations of westlope cutthroat trout and bill trout. Hidden Creek has the least linear disturbance and the most intact forest cover in its watershed compared to Dutch and Racehorse Creeks. As part of this study, 20 freeze-core substrate samples were collected from each stream adjacent to bull trout reds. These samples were then dried and sorted through a series of sieves. The researchers then measured the percentage of the total mass of the sample made up of silt and clay particles. Now, what they found was that Dutch and Racehorse Creeks had higher amounts of fine sediment in the spawning substrate than Hidden Creek. So this signals that there does seem to be a link between watershed disturbance and logged area and the quality of available spawning habitat. Again, the chance of embryo survival and rearing success is inherently higher in systems with less sedimentation and siltation. But it's the persistence of sediment in our stream bed profiles long after the direct impact of logging has occurred that is rather concerning. So where do we go from here? What is the fate of our native fisheries in Alberta? As we know from Calvin and Hobbes, the problem with the future is that it keeps turning into the present. Will we have to look at archival photos to remind ourselves of what we once had? And although we may never see a return to catches like we had in the past, can we at least hold on to what we do have? What is needed, it seems, is a shift in thinking from sustained timber production to sustainable forest management that allows for water storage, protection of water quality, and biodiversity. This, of course, may require a reduction in the total clear-cut footprint to allow for greater structural stand retention, protection and expansion of riparian buffers along all stream types, avoidance of steep slopes, quicker reclamation of roads within cut blocks, timely road abandonment and reclamation, access management to reduce motorized traffic, and installation of bridges, not culverts, where appropriate. We also need to plan for and anticipate natural processes like fire in our forest management models. Instead of where do we log next, the more pressing and urgent question, perhaps, that should be asked in view of protecting threatened species like the bull trout and the West Slope cutthroat trout is, should we log? When it comes to recovery efforts for these species, the time, it seems, to act is now. If we are truly serious about recovery efforts that we, at the very least, have a legal obligation to pursue, we do need to apply and abide by watershed disturbance thresholds as a first step. For already degraded watersheds, access management and habitat restoration is urgently needed. We also need to give appropriate protective status to watersheds with remaining key spawning streams and populations of native fish. Ecosystem-based management is about seeing the forest as a resource that provides a whole lot more than fiber and traditional economic outputs. Ecosystem-based planning is about recognizing both multiple and intrinsic social values of the forest. It's about sustaining all parts of the forest, especially the vulnerable pieces. And lastly, it's about thinking beyond the forest to downstream values. To achieve this type of ecosystem-based planning model, we also need to involve the public in meaningful, timely ways and making decisions that reflect broad-ranging societal values. Another underlying principle of ecosystem-based management is the need to continually monitor, and adapt. And this involves creating ecological benchmarks from which changes can be measured, consistently monitoring key variables as a test of performance, and taking the actions needed to address concerns identified, including taking a critical look at desirable land use choices. Lastly, we need to measure success with broad metrics that go beyond the economic bottom line, measurables such as water quality, biodiversity, and landscape aesthetics. The forests of the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains were viewed by early policymakers as pivotal to the settlement and well-being of the area later to be known as Alberta and Saskatchewan. Hence, the forests were reserved for water, for local timber needs, and to sustain wildlife. The need for watershed protection and maintenance of biodiversity is not an artifact of history, but a compelling need, we could argue, for today and the future, especially in terms of the challenges that are posed by climate change. So what will the future of Alberta's native fisheries be? I, for one, would really like to see this story have a happy ending. One where fish populations can be around for future generations to enjoy. And with that, I will end the presentation. Thank you.
Silos, you know, never just like to stay in. And I get to talk to forestry, oil and gas, anybody. I can break all the rules. So today, I've been tasked with kind of highlighting why the Alberta Invasive Plant Council has switched from plants to species. Okay, sorry. And then, so I'm going to talk about some invasive species, some current threats to Alberta that are driving this change. And I'm a weed specialist, so what I'm going to talk to you about a few weeds, just a little bit. And they do affect your industry, so you should pay attention. So just to give you an idea of invasive alien species in Canada, 473 vascular plants. And if that sounds like quite a bit, it is. It's actually 1 in 4 plants in Canada we're dealing with are invasive. So it's lots of work. Yep.
We have a problem with the connection.
Okay. Oh, you're not even seeing it?
No.
I'm talking away. Just to recap, 473, that's 1 in 4 plants dominate in Canada. And of particular interest to you folks, 181 insects that feed on woody plants. And I couldn't find out what percentage that actually represents, but I'm sure it's quite a bit. So that's what keeps you guys busy. There's 24 birds. Is anybody paying attention? Not me. Too much to worry about rather than birds. 26 mammals, reptiles, amphibians, 55 freshwater fish, and several fungi and mollusks. So there's lots of species willing and wanting to live in Canada. Not just people love Canada, species love Canada. So what helps the introduction of invasive alien species to Canada? We're doing huge amounts of trade with other countries, and it is steadily increasing. The transport times that are associated with that trade is shortening. I mean, you can get overnight from China to here, no problem. It'll cost you, but it's no problem. And things that get shipped with things, like items that are being shipped in little tag-alongs, are increasing in their survivability because of that time is shortening. Mail order and internet transactions are on the rise. You can order anything from anywhere, and this is probably driving the Canadian Border Service Agency crazy. They probably can't even keep up to all the inspections that they actually should be doing in Canada. And of course, recreational and business travel is very much on the rise. So people are moving and moving things. So just to highlight plants for a bit before we move on to species, Alberta has 225, so this is about half of the national average for Canada. We've been trying to mitigate invasive species since 1865, and Canada thistle started it off. So they were so concerned about Canada thistle, they actually named the act the Canada Thistle Act. And if you take nothing else home from me today, Canada thistle is not native to Canada. Okay? Despite the name, it's not native. We just got the bad rap for it. Canada thistle is still on the act today, so this Canada Thistle Act has evolved into this Alberta Weed Control Act, and it's still on there today. We haven't really won the war on Canada thistle, but it's still there as a tool for control. And just to give you a perspective on legislation on invasive species in Canada, Alberta has 13 pieces that mention invasive species. Weed Control Act is the major one because it completely focuses on invasive species. There are 15 pieces of provincial policies, directives, guidelines, so if you ever work out for us. Then the feds get involved. They have 8 pieces of legislation and 4 pieces on directives. So a total of 40 pieces of legislation in Canada that are dealing with invasive species. So it is a real threat, and we're trying to mitigate that. The whole point of this legislation is to protect the production, mostly agriculture, but it could be forestry as well, and the quality of land. So the threats, plants have usually dominated, but times are changing, and this reflects why the Alberta Invasive Plant Council has now voted to make the name change to Alberta Invasive Species Council. There are 2 species driving this change, the shift from plant to species. The species is affecting North America, and it's devastating to everyone connected to water. Do you guys drink water? I think so, right? So you're all affected. Even if it's not forestry related, you're affected. And this is the culprit. And if I could play like horror music right now, it would be playing. So this is a 4-inch pipe put into a body of water with quagga and zebra mussels. Can anybody want to take a hazard guess at how long this pipe was in the water for to get this thick? A day? Oh, well, it's not quite that bad. 3 months. 3 months is the time that it was in the water. And you can't even see through the pipe anymore. So it's a huge threat to any infrastructure, of water in the province. And just so you can track where this species has come in 1986 is when it was found in the Great Lakes. In 1991, it had spread to this extent. In 2001, to this extent. In 2011, it had jumped across all the way to the other side of the U.S. Pretty scary. So this slide shows where boaters are coming from. Those are the red dots, and they're all headed towards Washington. Apparently Washington has some really fabulous lakes. And we've done some surveys in the province. Boaters in the province are willing to drive 20 hours to a boat, like a good boat lake. So they're dedicated, and they're moving. And they're moving mussels with them. So Idaho is our first line of defense. They're the ones that are absent of mussels, and they are checking boats that are going through their boat stations at their borders. And they just did a tally of postal codes one weekend, and this is where they found people were going. So there wasn't a location of Edmonton and Calgary coming through their ports. So last year, fouled, so they had mussels confirmed. 56 boats were intercepted at the Idaho border. This is where they were all headed to. 3 were headed to Alberta. Now, Idaho has already alerted us to 4 occurrences just this spring. So we are quickly scrambling, trying to come up with a plan of attack. We're going to have boat stations this spring. Now, mussels are not the only threat driving this change. There are lots of other aquatics. You might have heard of the Asian carp. That's the one in the top right-hand corner. And the vibration of boats makes the fish jump out of water. So that's why the pitch has all the fish jumping out of water. It's the boat vibration that does that. So there's plenty of things in the invasive species world that are threatening Alberta. Quagga and zebra mussels are just keeping me up at night. So the really big thing that we need to do on most of these invasive species is prevent them. If we can prevent them coming into Alberta in the first place, we save a whole lot of heartache and woe. Why is prevention the key? Well, they did some economical analysis, and they found that for every dollar we're spending on prevention programs, we're getting $100 return for that money spent. Money well spent. Whereas if we keep it into a containment program where it's widespread damaging, we're barely getting our money back. So it pays to have an early detection, rapid response program. So that's the species side. Now I want to shift and give you some perspectives from the weed side that I'm dealing with. And these are just the really scary ones, so I just wanted to share some of the cool, but scary, weeds with you. Meadow hawkweed. We put this one on the act as prohibited noxious, which means it needs to be eradicated from Alberta in 2010. After we got everybody up to speed on what they were looking for, we are finding thousands and thousands of acres of hawkweed. This one's hairy on the leaves, hairs on the stem, hairs just underneath the flower. Yellow flowers. And yellow flowers are the most common ones, so not too many people are paying attention to this one. A close relative is orange hawkweed, which is very similar to meadow, except that it has the orange flower. And this is where we're finding them. This is a forested area that was just logged in the Crow's Nest Pass. And this is a meadow hawkweed meadow. And this is orange hawkweed in Alberta, in a grazing reserve, but it could have easily been taken from a grazing or a forested area. Salt cedar. Now this one was sold ornamentally as an ornamental tree, but the place where it gets scary is if it escapes down into the riparian areas, it can consume 750 liters of water per day. Huge, huge consumer. Drops water tables, gets its name salt cedar because it accumulates salt in the leaves, and then it drops the leaves, and only salt cedar can live by salt cedar because it's so salty. So Saskatchewan is dealing with an infestation. Montana, we're not there yet, but we do have some occurrences in the province, so we're scrambling to get rid of them. Garlic mustard. Now this one we put on the act as a prohibited noxious, thinking, oh, it's not even going to be able to survive in Alberta. Surprise, we found it. It's here in Edmonton. This is Mill Creek Ravine, garlic mustard, and it loves to be under trees, and it dominates once it's there. So that's the only thing that's growing underneath these aspen trees in the Mill Creek Ravine right now. Knotweed. This one is a prohibited noxious as well, needs to be eradicated. It's more of a shrub. There's 3 types. The picture on the top right-hand corner there is the 3 types that are actually regulated by the province. And its claim to fame is it took 70 million pounds to remove it from the 2012 London Olympics. You're asking, why do they spend so much money on this plant to eradicate it from the London Olympics? Well, you Google knotweed and you can find pictures to help support why they need to get rid of it. If they were to build their swimming pool, where it was located, if they were to build their swimming pool over top this knotweed, it had the strength to bust through the swimming pool. And we thought we were safe. I am now working on 3 locations in Alberta, one being in Grand Prairie next to a house. So the threat is real. So we should just give up, right? Do we stand a chance? I'm too much of an optimist. As stewards, whether it's forestry, agriculture, or oil and gas, doesn't matter what industry you're in, we're all stewards. We're trying to preserve Alberta for future generations. So we're all connected against invasive plants. So whether you eat, work, or play in Alberta, Alberta is what's at stake, and hopefully you will join me in the fight against all invasive species to make a difference. So what can you do? Well, educate yourself, and hopefully you share your information with others on invasive species. Hopefully you're not growing, buying, or spreading any invasive species in any of the work you do or at home. And hopefully you're reporting the invasive species, especially if any of those I showed today. You can report them to our 310-2777 number. It's a government number, no area code required. And that goes to a call center where we're actually responsible for taking action on those species. So are there any questions?
Given how Alberta looked after weeds back when, is it going to change going forward? No, like chamomile, they couldn't get rid of it, they haven't got rid of it.
Yeah.
What's going on with the other weeds?
So the other classification under the Act are noxious weeds, which include your scentless chamomile. So they're too widespread to eradicate from Alberta. That battle was lost long ago. So what we're now hoping to do is control them. So people are obligated who own land in Alberta to control those weeds still, so that they can save their neighbors from the same fate that they're actually facing. So they're still obligated under the Act to make control efforts on scentless chamomile, Canada thistle, those more common common tansy, those kind of big up-and-comers. So they're still obligated underneath the Act. It's just we're probably not resourced to the level that we need to actually make a big, huge difference. But we're holding ground in regards to those species. Yep.
So how then do we deal with municipalities that have done away with control programs for noxious weeds and such, like the city of Edmonton? And in that regard, I've seen an increase in noxious weeds coming throughout various communities, including common tansy, which I had a neighbor around my
hasn't done away with control programs. I work closely with them on their weed control program, so it is in place. The problem with the big centers like City of Edmonton and City of Calgary, they're getting pushback from people that are herbicide phobic. So they believe that herbicides are bad, even though they're probably the safest thing out there. They've been researched over and over. And there is a balance to be attained between herbicide and integrated management, so there has to be other options, obviously, but the only thing I can really say is we're all obligated, we're all working together. If you think some jurisdiction's not taking care of their weeds, you can definitely contact me, and I would approach them and try and work to getting them up to speed where they need to be. Does that answer? Yeah. Okay, anybody else yet?
What do you think the impact of spraying herbicides across the cut blocks and well sites all over the boreal forest is compared to some of the, like, they're not necessarily invasive, right? Like Canada thistle will only go on disturbed soils. They don't kind of tend to go through the forest, although they're on the riverbanks that are disturbed.
Yeah.
But we'll be introducing a lot of volume of herbicide to control some of this stuff in places where it hasn't been before.
And I'm the advocate that herbicides are not your silver bullet. Herbicides are very good at killing plants, it's true, but there's still that empty, bare ground where the plant was, the weed that you killed, and weeds are better situated to repopulate that bare soil. So you need to really do something in conjunction with herbicides, either reseeding, fertilizing to increase the competition of the stem that's already there, or something. It needs to be an integrated approach. Herbicides, we know from years past, are not the silver bullet. With time, or? I'm out of time. Okay, I'll be around for a little bit if anybody wants to come talk.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for having us here today. It's been a learning experience for me, and I'll carry this forward as I instruct and do my duties on the compensation board. The role of the trapper, animal management, and habitat. Animal management being the big point out of those three. Animal management is every bit as important as water management, air management, tree management, and all the other things that we're responsible for as we move forward. There's a tremendous amount of stress on our environment and our habitat, and it's our responsibility to see that we do everything we can as we move forward to ensure that what we leave for future generations is going to be as good, if not better, than what we've got now. The trapper role, as it relates to that, there's 18 fur bearer species here in Alberta. Trapping goes back to the beginning of time, beginning of man time anyways. It's what brought the settlers and the explorers into this area, and probably there's as many species of fur bearers here now as there was when they first arrived. We have a great variety of terrain and habitat here. Our industry is focused on training and educating trappers and the general public to show them that animal management is carried out by professionals, and that we respect the rights of Albertans and the animals, and that we do everything we can to move forward in a responsible way. The vision statement for the Alberta Trappers Association is as follows. We see in Alberta where the harvesting of fur bearers is an ongoing and respected management activity that helps ensure the continuation of this part of Alberta's heritage, culture, and identity. Very important, and it's something we all lose focus of as we carry out our duties, get involved in our industry every day, and we kind of get our head down and focused on doing our job and supplying our shareholders people like that with the expected results. As this relates to the forestry industry, there's a tremendous impact on trappers and trap line and animals as the forestry goes out and does their job. I in particular understand, and I believe most people do, the need for the harvest of the trees. And through being here today, I see the concentrated effort and the attempts that are being made to do so in the highest regards for our environment. I field a lot of calls through compensation from disgruntled trappers talking about forestry and forest industry and what they're doing to the environment. And through being here today, I'll be able to share with them a lot of what I learned from the presentations. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this. I read a quick article last night. It's actually in the information of an advertisement. It states, can you name another industry that is continuing to thrive despite the current economic downturn? And the answer to that is the fur industry. There's a huge demand for our fur. We live in the northern hemisphere. We grow and have some of the best fur in the world. There's a very high demand for it. Our industry has got a real shot in the arm lately. Fur prices have gone through the roof, and we expect that to be kind of the norm as opposed to a spike in the interest in what we have to offer. The statistics in this advertisement say there's about 15 million people worldwide involved in our industry, and that it's worth about $15 billion. So the next time you see a trapper traveling down his trap line on his skidoo or however he's getting around, you need to understand that he has a duty and a responsibility to be out there as well, and that he'll have a perspective that maybe you're not aware of. Most trappers don't learn what they learn from a book. They learn it from being observers of the environment and nature, and that it takes many years to learn how to manage animals and do it properly. We harvest a surplus every year. I have friends in the trapping industry that have trapped the same beaver pond for 25 years. It takes a tremendous amount of knowledge and experience to be able to do what we do. I don't want to live in a world where there's no coyotes and no beavers. All these animals have a role to play, and it's a very important role that they do. Beavers maintain water ponds and ecosystems that are very important not only to nature's ecosystems or environment, but to farmers and to flood control, all kinds of things that we overlook when we look at a beaver swimming in a pond, or a pond that is in a place that's not convenient for us. So we need the beavers. We need them to be there. They're no different than the coyotes. You know, if we don't have coyotes, we're going to be knee-deep in mice and rodents and other animals. We heard about grizzly bear protection and caribou and songbirds and fish today. And as you go back to your jobs, you need to understand that there's many perspectives and many concerns and many responsibilities that fall upon us as people here in Alberta, and that we will be judged on how we do. The world is watching what's happening here in Alberta. When they talk about pipelines and dirty oil and stuff like that, we need to not just focus on that, but we need to focus completely on our environment and doing the best job that we can. So I'm not going to go on any longer than that. I'll answer any questions regarding the wolves following the skidoo trail. Somebody had a question earlier that brought up one of the speakers. Wolves will go where they want to go. They'll take the path of least resistance. And whether the skidoo trail's there or not, they're going to get the caribou or the deer or whatever happens to be in that valley. They can travel 10 to 30 miles a night at ease. So the gentleman had a question over there about the skidoo trail leading into a caribou area from the trapper. Whether the trail's there or not, the wolves are going to be there, and I hope they will be. We need the wolves. We don't need to be knee deep in them. as we don't need to be knee-deep in grizzly bears. But they all have a role to play, and it's our responsibility to ensure that we protect the environment enough that the animals are there for future generations. Thank you, and I really appreciate the opportunity of being here, and we'll have an opportunity to use this information from the other presenters as I move forward. So if there's any questions, I'll gladly take them. I have a booth back there. To keep it short, you might just want to stop by and see me there if you have any questions. Thank you.
Our next presentation is Carl Grandmere from the Alberta Society of Injured Birds of Prey. He's been working with displaced wildlife for more than 30 years. He is the director of the Alberta Society of Injured Birds of Prey and runs the Strathcona Raptor shelter near South Cooking Lake.
My name is Carl Grandmere, and I run the Strathcona Raptor shelter. I'm generally talking to grade 4s. I should warn you about this presentation. This isn't a grade 4 presentation. Actually, there's probably some graphic stuff in here that, it's probably not. I didn't realize everyone was sitting at a dinner table. So anyway, this is our wife Eva, and one of our birds, this is actually Marion's red-tailed hawk that we brought in. So most of you will be out on the roads. Most of the birds that we get are hit by cars, and if you're in Alberta, there's roads everywhere, and you're bound to come in, find an injured bird of one sort or another in your travels. The birds, we get calls all the time. Most of the people that have a raptor close by, a surprising amount of them are really in fear of the bird and don't want to go near it. We get a lot of I don't want to touch the bird kind of thing. And we really don't go out on spec. If you haven't got the bird under control, then generally it's not useful for us to go out and try and find a bird a half hour after someone's seen it by the side of the road. It's just a matter of resources. So anyway, we encourage people to try and catch some birds. There's really two responses, fight or flight. If you find a bird and it's in a flight response, if you chase it long enough, if it's injured, you'll be able to catch it. If you can get close enough to it and it's still on its feet, the best way to catch it, I'll tell you this, is to get over top of it, press down on its back, get both of its wings, and then slide your hands down to its feet. The other response is the fight response. With that one, it's a lot more easier to deal with. So, if you can't, well, let's see. This is a good restraint here. If you've got the bird, you just hold it under your arm, hold its feet. This one's better because, of course, it's politically correct. He has gloves on, he has glasses on. You put the bird under the same arm, then you have a hand free. And the birds don't generally bite. Really what you have to worry about are its feet. In a flight response, or in a fight response, like if you get close enough to them, they'll generally flip on their back and put their feet up to defend themselves. And if you've got a towel or a coat, you can just throw it over them. They'll grab onto it. Raptorius means to grasp, you can just pick the whole thing up and put it in a